Thanks for watching once again and tuning in to Tarot Tuesdays. Today we're dancing with the devil, the number 15 card of the deck in our ongoing exploration of the major arcana. My name is Shannon Douglas. I'm the author of the forthcoming book Chasing Quicksilver, and over the last several months, I've been exploring the major arcana of the tarot, doing a deep dive into the esoteric and the archetypal meanings behind each of the cards, and as they progress through the major arcana. Part of the reason for doing this and sharing it with you is most of the time, if you buy a deck of tarot or if you've been studying tarot, they come with a little book. You get a couple lines of memory keys to help you understand the meanings of the cards, and people rely on that very often, especially if they're new to tarot. Whereas a long exploration or contemplation of the cards, I think, and as a practitioner of tarot, the study of the meanings of the card reveals depths of wisdom that don't come through in those little books that come with your deck. So today we're going to talk about the devil card, and the devil card, as you may know if you've been following along, is paired with my favorite card in the deck. I think the most interesting and most powerful card, perhaps that's just for me, that's the number 6 card, the Lovers. And when we look at the relationship between the Lovers and the devil, we see a parallel structure in the visual representation. We see the man, Adam and Eve, in the Lovers card, or the representation thereof, with a higher self or an angel represented in the background. With the devil card, we see that position shift. Still man and woman in the foreground, Adam and Eve, perhaps the devil in the background. And there's a nuance in this representation in this card that pivots the meaning between the lovers and pivots the outcome between the lovers and the devil. And that nuance is this, and very, very few sort of iterated decks through the years catch this subtlety, because I believe many of the creators of tarot and art decks that we get don't understand the depth and the importance of this nuance. And that is, in the number 6 card, you see the man, which represents our conscious mind. Doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, represents our conscious, our egoic mind, who we think we are, the eye behind the eyes, let's say. And he has his gaze turned to his woman companion. She represents our unconscious mind. And her language is a language of symbols, and the domain of the unconscious is when we look to our unconscious mind. She then, you can see her gaze looking up to the angel or the higher self in behind. And it is a message in the Lovers card that when we look to our unconscious mind, this opens up the pathway to the divine or to God. Now, we can think about this in terms of chi or prana or energy. Lots of words for this. The word Pneuma, I'm exaggerating that. Pneuma is the Greek word, which means breath. The word psyche, the goddess Psyche, the word psyche means butterfly, but it also means breath. And this connects to this notion of chi or prana, like Reiki or Tai Chi. This awareness of the energy, the life force that flows through us. When we connect through our unconscious mind, we connect to the larger field, the larger life force, the larger field of energy that we're embedded in, and energy flows down through us and for us in terms of our own vitality. And all beings need this life force in order to survive. Now, the problem with that's outlined in the devil card and in the subtlety I mentioned is that the conscious mind represented in the card is not looking to the unconscious. And as a consequence, it sees distortions in the world. It sees illusions and demons. So when we don't connect or don't acknowledge the unconscious stuff that we've got, we fall prey and victim to what Carl Jung talked about extensively as our capacity or our tendency to project shadows project our fears, our deficiencies, and our own self-criticisms that we hold unconsciously. We project those onto the world. And this is where some of these distortions come in. Now, if a projection structure, if we reject our unconscious mind enough, then we go beyond the projection of shadows into full-on experiencing of our anima and animus in people around us. And unfortunately, this happens often in dysfunctional love relationships, where some people say we marry our unconscious minds, or we marry a projection of ourselves. And that incapacity to acknowledge our own unconscious, acknowledge our own stuff, gets projected, and we live a relationship with a projection of ourselves, a projection of our unconscious, as the relationship becomes more and more toxic in a dysfunctional relationship like this. So these kinds of relationships are very often paired dynamics, so we get codependency in there. So someone who wants to fill their own lack of connection with spirit, with God, with prana and chi, by having a sense that they're helping others. So they derive identity from overly helping, rescuing, that sort of thing. The other side of that is the narcissistic or the borderline or the sociopathic, psychopathic personality structures, the abusive structures, who have a deep hole in the psyche that can't be filled, whether it's a self-loathing or a lack of self-confidence, and they feel that they need to draw energy from others in order to psychically sustain themselves. So they're cut off. People who run these patterns are cut off from the breath of life, from prana, from psyche, from chi, as it's known in the East, and we get these unfortunate toxic games and relationships that people play. So focusing more on the sort of personality disordered side of this, because that's where I think the devil representation really comes in. This intense projection of one's own shadows and deficiencies onto another, weaving an illusion on the world, creating what's sometimes called a reality distortion field, where narcissists and borderlines are so, the hole inside in the psyche, this gap or this void that exists because of the broken relationship with the unconscious mind, the unwillingness to look at one's own self and one's own darkness, becomes deeply problematic because the fear is so intense that for a person who suffers from a personality disorder like psychopathy or narcissism or borderline personality disorder, it is aggressively projected onto the outside to reveal one's weakness, to acknowledge that one made a mistake or an error in judgment or did something wrong, has a complex equivalence at the unconscious level. Meaning that the unconscious frames these acknowledgments or a mistake as being a bad person, as being evil, as being wrong, and the ego, the egoic mind, will do anything that it possibly can in order to protect the unconscious from that acknowledgement. And so these defense mechanisms, psychic defense fields, get built up, and this slew of projections takes over the world. It's very hard when you're dealing with somebody who is basically a pathological liar, so attached and so protective of their own wounded and deeply vacuous psyche, this reality distortion field is extraordinary. And if you've ever had the misfortune of being woven into one of these spaces where up and down is down and up and black is white, and these games get played, it's extremely disruptive and toxic. Now, the devil card, the number 15, follows the card that we covered last week, temperance. And temperance is about integrating polarities, and having gone through stages of life or events of life or psychic growth, psychological development, where we can integrate the extremes of our psyche into one centered, tempered individual, much like putting the temper in a sword, heating it to red hot, pounding it malleable into shape, putting it in cold water, setting the strength in the blade, focused in temperance in the middle. The 15 card says if you, as an individual, through the development of the soul, the psyche, and the development of the self, isn't able to accomplish that kind of integration, we have extremes in polarity, and those extremes in polarity show up in the Devil card. They show up in the Devil card in the sense of its dysfunctions, and so this is very often the Devil card gets represented to do with addictions, to do with attachments. These are problems of the ego grabbing onto something too tightly and trying to fill that void inside, that lack of connection with the self that's depicted with the gaze of both the man and the woman in the card, creating all kinds of problems. So the Devil is one of those scary cards that shows up in a reading. We can imagine that it would show up in the context of the querent, the individual in the card, and it would or individual seeking a reading, and it would indicate or suggest that that person needs to acknowledge some of their own stuff in order to make a transition out of that particular situation, or it would raise the question of, okay, are you the problem here in this situation? And are you dealing with this field of illusions and projection? So what's really going on in a circumstance? Now, one might also see it in relationship in a reading to another person in the querent's orbit or environment. And it would suggest that they're dealing with perhaps some sort of reality distortion field or ego in their environment that is so fragile that it can't accept any kind of criticism or accept any kind of responsibility or accountability for making mistakes. And this is a dangerous individual. These are people who play, unfortunately, with this dynamic or have this dynamic at play within them, feed off the energy of others because they're cut off from source. And the only way that they can feel replenished is to draw energy from people in their environment. This is analogous in many ways to the vampire archetype, where we have these distortions in the reality field, this hypnotic and charismatic individual who draws people into their orbit, and then the illusions start to show up, but sometimes too late in the development of the relationship that would allow someone to extricate themselves from that in an easy way. We can see this playing out, this archetype playing out at large, as I've said before, in the politics in the United States, where we have an individual who is so self-interested, and you know, whether you hate Trump or you're a fan of Trump, I think we could look at his behavior and his words, and I would challenge anybody to find a time when Donald Trump admitted that he was wrong without choking on his own words. It's only happened a couple of times. One of the times early, I think, early in his presidency or just before he took office, he gave a press conference and he said that, in fact, that Obama was born in the United States. He had fed that conspiracy theory and that set of lies for years, the birther conspiracy, and insisted that Obama wasn't an American citizen and not a legitimate president as a consequence. So if you've ever seen that video, you can tell he's choking on his words. So my challenge would be, other than a situation like that, which was extremely rare and has been extremely rare, to find a time when this person admitted that they made a mistake. and they simply don't. Now, a well-formed psyche, a well-developed individual, someone who has at least some kind of acceptance of their own unconscious, of their own stuff, the recognition of their own fallibility in life, is actually stronger and more psychically contained and whole than a person who can't. Very often we learn from making mistakes. If we can acknowledge our mistakes, we can incorporate that mistake into our experience and avoid making that mistake in the future. Unfortunately, a person who is possessed by the devil, this distorted ego drive, is very, very reluctant and opposed to admitting any kind of fallibility or any kind of mistake whatsoever. So positioning this card in terms of the cycle of the second half of the major arcana, we can see that it outlines or depicts a consequence of not integrating the self and finding temperance, that virtue of temperance within the self in the 14 card. It builds on experiences of Mayet at the Justice card, the balance, the recognition of the balance of one's own behavior and consequences. It outlines problems that we can start to become aware of at higher levels of development. In order to move on beyond the Devil card, we can see that the attachment and the ego at the Devil card leading to the number 16 card, which I'm going to cover next week, the Tower, informs the narrative. So if a person can't integrate some of those polarities at 14, it distorts within the Devil card at 15 in this big ego distortion, illusion, attachments, ego, this narcissism or even sociopathy, sociopathic unwillingness to acknowledge one's own mistakes. Then we can see at the 16 card, the Tower, which I think everyone who studies tarot in some capacity, even people with a loose vocabulary around it, know the tarot card, the Tower, and that it depicts the collapse of the ego, which I'm going to cover next week. My name is Shannon Douglas. Just to be notified so that you know when Tarot Tuesday videos are coming up, in case you don't have a calendar handy, hit the bell to get a notification and make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'm actively growing. I have now, another 5-6 cards to cover off in this journey through the major arcana. And I hope that I'm adding some depth to this for you and making tarot more memorable and more accessible. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section. And if I missed anything around this card, the Devil, let me know. I'd love to get different perspectives and grow some ideas around these cards as I'm sharing with people my tarot experience.